Hola, muy buenas a todos y bienvenidos, como siempre, a Cosas Militares. Como ya sabréis muchos, se está produciendo una situación de cierta crisis en torno a Níger debido al golpe de Estado dado por una facción del ejército y hay una posible intervención militar liderada por la potencia regional que es Nigeria, debido precisamente pues, a la presencia de distintos actores y al deseo de Nigeria de evitar este tipo de golpes de Estado que pueden llegar a afectar a su propia estabilidad. Hoy contamos con nosotros para abordar este tema con un periodista y presentador de televisión especializado en la temática en asuntos internacionales, que es Sogah de Joy News, un periodista ganés. Así que vamos a conocerlo todo a través de la perspectiva que tienen los propios países de la región. First of all, let me welcome you, Bless. Thank you very much for being here with us today.
Hello there, Iago. It's great to be speaking to you all the way in Spain, but greetings from Accra. And I'm so excited to be a part of your show tonight.
Right, so thank you very much, really. And first of all, if you could present yourself, if you could tell us a little bit about your professional background, that would be awesome.
My name is Blessed Sogah. I'm a broadcast journalist working with Joy News. So Joy News is Accra's 24-hour news channel, largely producing news content, but we're part of a family called the Multimedia Group, which has several outlets broadcasting in many parts of Accra. So we have the Accra Bureau, which has 3 other radio stations, and a television station, one dedicated towards news, and Joy Prime, which does much more of entertainment. Then we're in other parts of the country. But arguably, we're the biggest news network here in Accra, feeding some of the West African countries as well. So our viewership is quite good. What's my role as a journalist? Well, I'm on a current affairs program called The Pulse. The Pulse is a political affairs program. It airs daily from 3, that's 1500 GMT, to 1700 GMT every day. But I'm head of the diplomatic and foreign affairs desk here at Joy News. So what we do is try also to connect to the African diaspora and our viewership outside of Ghana, design programs and get content that will, of course, feed these sort of audience. So we have 2 unique programs: Foreign Affairs Show, which is called Foreign Affairs, and we also have Africa Connect, which is much more tailored and suited towards the needs of the West African and, by extension, African continent. So that's what I've been up to for a number of years here at Joy News. But professionally, I've been doing this for about a decade now.
So let me do a Spanish remark. Bueno, esto todo lo traduciremos, por supuesto, en subtítulos una hora después de concluir el directo. Como ya veis, si queréis seguir al propio Blessed y conocer pues la realidad de África Occidental directamente a través de sus ojos, de cómo lo ven ellos, pues os invito a ver Joy News y a los distintos programas que os acabo de comentar. Okay, so thank you very much, Blessed, again. And let's start with the thing. One of the very important questions is, how would you explain what is going on at Niger? What's your point of view on it?
Okay, so just about a week or more ago, we had a shocking announcement. Well, shocking to the world, but for experts, they would say they saw this trend sort of coming. What happened was the Presidential Guard stationed in Niamey, working supposedly to protect the president, democratically elected. He's called Mohamed Bazoum. Mohamed Bazoum, unfortunately, was toppled by his own Presidential Guard. And the guard went on live television to announce that they were taking over power and shutting all of their borders, both air and land borders, to all other neighboring countries, and by extension, severing their ties, long-standing ties with the French government. Now, this will be historic because traditionally, Niger is a known, country that has its colonial ties and even present-day ties with the French, simply because, one, it's a West French African country, and we know that they've been under the domination and control of the French people for quite some time now. And so that announcement was shocking to us. And then we're here today where we're seeing General Abdul Rahmani Chiani, who's now serving as the president or the leader of the military junta that we're seeing in Niger. So that's it on the latest announcements that we have. But to contextualize what's happening in West Africa and why we need to have this conversation, West Africa now is experiencing, by extension, about the fourth military takeover in this very sub-region that we have. First, Guinea, then there was an attempted coup also in Guinea-Bissau that sort of normalized. Then Mali followed. Burkina Faso is already suffering with insurgency. The military then took over through the leadership of Traoré. And we're now seeing Niger also follow suit. So that's why there's a concern about what's happening in Niger and why that is becoming a trend in West Africa, spreading to parts of the North, East, or Central Africa, and threatening the entire continent. That's why the conversation is very important.
All right. So, what about your country? What about Ghana? What's your security concern? What's your point of view, particularly on the issue?
Yeah, I'm grateful that you're bringing Ghana up. Now, that's where you see Ghana. Ghana is by far the most stable, democratically speaking country in the whole of West Africa. And in fact, let's put it in context, in the whole of Africa. First country, sub-Saharan, to gain independence from the English rule. And here's where we find ourselves in the midst, surprisingly, of French West African countries. So you see to the west, Cote d'Ivoire there. To the east, we have Togo, which is also another French, then historically colony, but now they're a sovereign country. Cote d'Ivoire is same. Then you talk about Burkina Faso, which is also another uniquely French country. So Ghana is a democratic country surrounded by French West Africa, if you want to call them that way. In fact, their heartbeat being Cote d'Ivoire, just being neighboring to the Republic of Ghana. That's where we find ourselves. But surprisingly, in as much as we find ourselves being the most democratic country, we're becoming an oasis in a West Africa sub-region that's being gradually controlled and taken over by the military. You look at the history of all of these countries bordering Ghana and also those who are a bit far away from us, they've had some instability or the other. Some attempts were made diplomatically to stabilize the region, but now you have the reversal of the trend. And now we're seeing the form of military takeovers like never before. And these military takeovers are also experiencing public support. So that's where the threat is. You also have, on the other hand, to our northern border, and if you could just bring back the map as you just indicated there, you would see that Burkina Faso is right ahead on top of us. Burkina Faso has been the shed between the Sahel and Ghana. Now, the Sahel has its unique jihad problems or violent extremism problems, which is equally posing a threat to Burkina Faso, a reason for which Traoré and his military regime explained that they had to take over power militarily so they can stabilize the situation. It's the reason for which they, in fact, severed their ties with the French military there in Burkina Faso. But the unique thing, and this is a common phenomenon that you'd find with all West African countries, their borders are a bit porous. Now, you may, of course, being an expert here and myself understanding the dynamics, see it as a security threat. But our people do not see it that way. Why? They do not see it as a security threat, largely because within the region, what you find happening is that people have intermarriages and people tend to move across the border freely without necessarily experiencing any sort of heckling from the official dome in terms of military customs or whatever it is, because West Africa has a unique, feeling of togetherness and intermarriages. In fact, in my home village where I come from, you could be in a farm and see just across the other road the territories of Togo and some houses in Togo. So people have intermarriages. People either go to farm in Togo, come back to rest back in Ghana as they are bold. So there's fluidity in the terms of movements that we see for people. And that's why any form of infiltration from the top, be it the violent extremism, will trickle right down and will come to the coastal states easily because our borders are not as secure. That is why we're seeing this, and I'm speaking from the perspective of many experts, are seeing this as a threat and a challenge that the regional body called ECOWAS, we call it ECOWAS because it's an abbreviation for the Economic Community of West African States, are coming together now to say, let's bring a solution that can help us tackle this problem. And we'll get to it shortly.
By the way, just as a matter of curiosity, is this idea of West Africa being like a big family related to Pan-Africanism, or it is not? Just as a curiosity.
It's been part of the Pan-African movement ever since we gained independence. I must say that our first president, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, was part of those who extended help to French West Africa. I'll give you an example. Guinea, in the 60s, was trying very hard to cut their ties with the French government at the time. We gave all of our resources to Guinea-Conakry. It's the reason for which they've named their presidential house after our president. Because we extended help at the time. They wanted to be independent and wanted to control all of their affairs. In fact, when our president was toppled, our first president was deposed through a military coup d'etat, he had to spend some time in Guinea-Conakry. So that explains the reason for which we're seeing what we're seeing today. The fact that more and more West African countries believe that we share common ideas, common values, and we've been sharing the common effort at integrating. In fact, if you take a look at the whole of African continent, I must tell you that West Africa is the most integrated part of Africa. ECOWAS is the largest trading zone, the West African Monetary Zone, in the whole of Africa because of our population, significant population. We have Nigeria alone having a population of over 200 million people. That tells you that we are big and there's a lot at stake. So we've always shared that brotherhood, and these happenings are beginning to scare everybody, and the reason for which the regional body is coming together to say we need to deal with this.
All right, so now we are speaking of a military intervention against one of the countries in that family, we would say. How does it feel, especially in Nigeria, about these kind of coups? Why are they so threatening to take such a strong measure? I mean, what's the mechanism that makes them so such a problem?
Okay, I need to put this in context. The decision to use the military is not solely a decision by the Nigerian military. What we have happening actually is that the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, as I was talking to you earlier about, has decided that if in 1 week the military junta does not hand over power, they will be deploying troops that will be contributed from my country, from Nigeria, from all other African countries, come together and then deploy that military team into Niger to restore constitutional order. We've never seen this kind of announcement before, and that's what's stirring and stoking a lot of conversation. But for Nigeria, you can understand why their leader will take such a decision, simply because Nigeria shares its borders with Niger, and they have over 1 million citizens living just across the border. That's why they've been holding what, for instance, you could see the demonstrations and protests that they've been holding, just trying as much as possible to call on their authority to be cautious, because any move that triggers instability will cross over and affect parts of Nigeria as well. So yes, they are a bit more concerned based on the issue of proximity, and obviously it's the reason for which they are leading or trying or attempting as much to lead the military efforts on this.
Well, I will. A subscriber, thank you for the donation. Gonzalo Gutierrez says, blessed. Do you believe that the fact that the junta seems to have a positive support from the people at Niger, which I don't know if how true is that they have a positive support from the people, but okay, let's say it might become quite hard to find a solution that doesn't pass through an armed conflict. What do you think on that?
And thanks for that listener bringing that up. Yes, and that's why I was talking about this, troubling trend that we're seeing. That our coup d'etats we're seeing of late, yes, I'm a Democrat, but there's something striking about them. You find in Mali, in Guinea, in Niger now, that the people appear to be supporting the activity or actions of the military. In fact, I tell you what, when our president was the chair of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, the Guinea coup happened, and he led the delegation into Guinea. Surprisingly, when ECOWAS got there, the citizens were demonstrating against any form of intervention by ECOWAS to even stop the military junta from continuing their activities. And that's why people are beginning to get concerned about what's happening. That is it because our democratically elected leaders are losing constitutional legitimacy, and probably that's why you have these military leaders, seizing power in quite a Rambo style fashion. Yet people still keep urging them on. And if you look at the index of development as opposed to the levels of course we're having, you can tell that there's a bit of a reflection there and a direct bearing that the least developed countries, it's just from my personal observation, the least developed countries in the sub-region are taking that lead with the military takeovers. And that's a dangerous sign to leadership, to know that if you do not meet the economic aspirations of your people, they might be extreme. I'm not endorsing it, but it's the reality of the kinds of things that we're seeing here in West Africa.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. Now, what do you think on, let's say there's a military effort on Niger? Do you think that Ghanai's army will take part on that? Or is it like, okay, we can support it politically, maybe logistically, but we won't take part on such a thing? What do you think on that?
Well, it's interesting that you're bringing this up because I was interested as well in finding out what our decision would be. Just last week, the United Kingdom's Foreign Secretary James Cleverly was in Accra, and so we're fortunate. I was fortunate as well to be part of the media crew covering his arrival. And he then held a joint, the Ghanaian Armed Forces held a joint military exercise, just demonstrating our capabilities at fighting violent extremism when he arrived. So fortunately, the defense minister of our country is called Dominic Niti, who was present. So I put the question to him as to why we would want to militarize the solution in West Africa. And he says, well, the military stands ready, except that the final decision lies with the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. In our case, that's our president, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo. So he'll be making the final decision this week. And from the look of things, other leaders appear to be supporting the ECOWAS move. He was, in fact, there last weekend in Nigeria when the decision was taken for the military troops to be deployed. There's no dissent or any attempt to fight that from the Ghanaian official side, not even in Parliament. We haven't seen any official statement. So we're just waiting to see if indeed that final decision will be given. Last weekend, or just a couple of days ago, we saw our military chiefs meet in Abuja again to discuss the technicalities in the deployment. So that's where we are now, waiting to see what decision our president will take. But when I engaged the defense minister, his words were that the days of taking and seizing power by military force is far from over, and that we, in spite of our economic limitations, will still go ahead to do the deployment and contribute to our troops. That's why the question of financing is coming up, as to whether or not there's going to be an external force that will finance this. If that happens, we're going to become the playground for another proxy war that may likely happen in the West Africa sub-region, because these military groups that we see here appear to be having some support, and I can't say that for a fact that it's from the Wagner, but some of them have shown signs that there's some sort of funding from the outside world, a reason for which they are emboldened and taking these activities. Now you see, and in a very unprecedented manner, the military leaders of Mali and Burkina Faso writing an official public statement to say, if you attack Niger, it's going to be war in West Africa. That's how dangerous the situation is, and that's why we need to be cautious.
Well, now, that's it, the point. For me, it is really surprising. If this was Europe, I would be pretty sure that the EU wouldn't do anything. But I don't know. It looks more dangerous maybe over there, because I see them really, or I feel that this is serious. So what do you think? Do you think that Nigeria is really capable and has the will to intervene militarily and face a war against Niger?
Well, we call them Big Brother Nigeria, and it's simply because of their numbers.
Yeah.
nation. They are the biggest economy in West Africa. So they lead, we likely follow. That's always the trend. Ghana, Nigeria, very good partnership over the years. But then, in Nigeria itself, Nigeria has a unique situation where its president and his legitimacy is even being contested in court. So he's not out of the woods here in terms of having the full level of legitimacy. In their parliament, in their Senate, you find their Senate saying, per the Constitution, we need to give you the go-ahead. We're not giving you that go-ahead. And so he's locked up now. And I'm just wondering what other West African countries such as mine would do, knowing that the Senate in Nigeria says they don't want a militarized situation. The citizens living neighboring Nigeria, at Niger, the Nigerians living in Niger, are also demonstrating to say, don't use the military because we've been here. We are now numbers, we're over 1 million. So that's the situation in which we find ourselves now.
Wow. But do you find it likely? I mean, you are there, you know your big brother neighbor.
The suspicion, and having spoken to experts, the suspicion now is that we may be having support from external forces, because looking at the condemnation that's coming in from the European Union and France, indicating that it will really support the militarized situation, some experts believe that the funding may be coming from outside. So if the funding is coming from outside, why would you be worried? Just go ahead, take the funding, and then stabilize the situation. Because what concerns us now in West Africa, surprisingly, and I draw connection, will equally spread upwards. You look at North Africa, the likes of Algeria, Morocco, and the rest, Tunisia, they are all concerned. We just heard from the Algerian president indicating his position on the matter. Algeria, surprisingly, shares some of its borders with Niger. Any inflammation of the situation could jeopardize the stabilization of the Algeria. And we know that we're just a few hours across the Mediterranean. You're going to be having a tripled or quadrupled crisis when it comes to these immigration trends that we're seeing into Europe. So you don't expect the EU to stand aloof and say, we don't really care about what's happening in West Africa. They have to be concerned because of the dynamics of security that we have in the region.
Oh, really interesting. And what about the other neighbors, the small brothers, we could say? What about Burkina Faso? What about Mali? Do you feel that the threat to intervene in such war is real, or what do you expect on them?
I have a feeling they will. And the reason for which they will be because of the shared anger that is happening across the West Africa sub-region. Okay, now Ibrahim Traore leads the military regime in Burkina Faso. Okay, when he attended the Russia-Africa summit, here's what he said: that now they do not feel that they should be cowards to fight the war of accountability and justice from afar in the West or take anyone on. They're coming right to the doorsteps of the leadership of their countries and to demand accountability. It's the reason for which you see this trend of people all across West Africa saying, well, we don't feel the military should be ruling us, but if you have constitutional dictators, people who would want to run and beyond their term limits, then the only way to stop them is to bring in a strong man that will control the situation. But you know what? I believe in what President Obama said some time ago, that Africa does not need strong men. We need strong institutions. And I need to re-emphasize that through this interview, that we need institutions that will work and not personalities that will be glorified. Because once personalities are glorified, they entrench what they believe in. The challenges within their communities will not be solved because no one will have the effrontery or the authority or that strong stance to stand up to them in the name of democracy. Nobody is going to do that. But once we have strong institutions, the powers will be dispersed and systems and countries can function even when they are so-called strong and mighty and upright leaders are not in power. So institutional capacity is what we need to build across the West African sub-region so that we can enhance and entrench democracy.
All right. And speaking about the US, Obama, what do you expect from the US? What would you expect from France? What about China? What's your take on these countries?
Okay, I mean it's the usual, geopolitics that will come in, and we're seeing that play out already. Because during the Russian African summit, you saw Traore from Benin, Burkina Faso, attend the Russian African summit as a military ruler. Now, Russia hasn't stated that it backs the activities of the Wagner forces in Burkina Faso, but we've seen our president, for instance, during the US Africa summit, tell Secretary Blinken that, look, we have Wagner at our borders. And when he made that statement, it became a global matter of concern because many fear and many experts were saying, you're going to be drawing the geopolitics closer to our borders. Well, we're scared of that, but looking at what's happening now through ECOWAS, and once we go in for support from the EU and from the likes of France, be sure that other powers would also come through. Because in the likes of Mali already, we know that there's diamond deposits. Guinea, so rich in all the minerals that you can talk about. And these superpowers are equally interested in these markets. So they will come in. And we may become, that's the fear, the playground of the new geopolitics that's happening around the world. And that's what many of us dread. And we wish that there will be a more diplomatic way. If these powers would want to intervene, they must support and use, in terms of that channel, the diplomatic channels that I'm talking about, use it to the best of their advantages, and we then come also through to partner with them in getting a roundtable solution to this, not perhaps a militarized situation, because that may inflame passions the more and put people at the extreme ends of their ideas. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, but what about China particularly? Could you tell us something on the Chinese position? What you expect, or maybe it is too gray? They just focus on economics and it's not that important.
China is a very, silent diplomat. I like to call them that way because they are feeding into their whole concept of the peaceful rise, as they call it. But at some point, they would have to come in, because there will be interest at play, interest in terms of markets, in terms of new opportunities, and in terms of solidarizing with their allies, long-standing ones in the region. They are silent as of now because we've not seen at full display any elements from the West or from EU zone or from France coming directly into the tension. When that happens, that invitation will take place, and that's where China may be forced, at least, to come up.
Wow. Really, thank you very much, Blessed. I have just one question, probably the worst one for you. Okay, so let's think of, in Europe we saw Ukraine, and now we are all focused on Ukraine all day, all night, right? And we saw how this happened. Nobody expected a war. Finally, the war happened, and even it developed in a way that nobody expected. So let's get a Ukraine scenario. What happens if Nigeria leads the military intervention? Burkina Faso and Mali work and send their troops in favor of Niger, and the military intervention does not work very well. What would you expect from something like that?
That's our fear right now. And I must tell you, just a couple of minutes ago, I got off the phone with the Deputy Foreign Affairs Minister of our country. We want to know our stance, because once that goes public, then we'll be able to scrutinize why we are going in, and number two, what our interest is. I was just interacting with some of the residents, Ghanaian nationals living in Niger, and they tell me A militarized situation will not solve our problem. They are okay with their daily lives, except to say that they are being threatened now. That if your country contributes troops to come and attack us in Niger, then you are going to pay the ransom. That's how difficult the situation is. And it's what we've seen play out in the likes of the Ukraine-Russian war, because the civilians are going to be the casualties. In West Africa, we've been on the backside already, attempting to make it forward in terms of our economic development and advancement. What's the solution when we opt for ammunitions and wars? Wars have never solved our problems. Radicalism hasn't solved our problems over the years. So if we are to move forward, diplomacy will be. And diplomacy in the form of allowing the free expression of people's minds, people's wills, especially even if we're to opt for democracy, it must be done well. And that's why I call for institutions being strengthened. You have in some countries, for instance, presidents opting to go for a third term. You have in some of the West African countries, social media being shut down. You have in other countries that are going for elections next year, giving a quota to politicians and political parties to have some representation in parliament before they could contest elections. That's the reality of the constitutional or institutional breakdown in some of the West African countries. If that is addressed, we will avoid that nightmare of similar things that we're seeing happen between Russia and Ukraine. Because the lesson learned so far is nobody wins. And trust me, if that similar situation comes to West Africa, nobody will win. That's the fact.
Wow, really. Thank you very much, Blessed. It has been a pleasure of interview to do. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And greetings to all of your viewers once more.
Hey, if you want to, I can give you a minute if you have some message to deliver to the Spaniard audience, or just whatever you prefer.
Greetings, everyone, and greetings from West Africa. I'm speaking to you from Ghana, and we're full of hope that Europe will also keenly watch and possibly also reach out diplomatically to our brothers down here on what's happening, so we can find peace, because peace in West Africa is peace for Europe. Peace in West Africa is advancement for world growth, and indeed will be in line with multilateralism through the UN Charter, which is advocating for development and leaving no one behind by 2030, which is in line with the goals of the Sustainable Development Goals that the UN and all countries around the world are happily a signatory of. So let's come together, let's build peace. And if you have any means of reaching out, do reach out and call for peace. That's all we want now.
Well, really, thank you very much, Blessed, and thank you to all the audience for being here with us today. Thank you very much, both.
Pleasure. But as how my people say it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, really, Blessed. I will do the final remarks now, so thank you very much. Ok, pues bueno, ya lo habéis escuchado. Para los que no hayáis podido entender el inglés, no os preocupéis, vamos a traducirlo todo para que luego pues, lo tengáis todo disponible en subtítulos en español. En cuanto acabe la entrevista me voy a poner con ello. Ha sido interesantísimo escuchar a Blessed y escuchar pues, el punto de vista de un periodista especializado de la propia África Occidental. Como veis, la situación es realmente tensa, no es ninguna broma. Pero, bueno, esperemos que de alguna manera se resuelva este entuerto que no tiene o no parece tener buena solución. En todo caso, ya veis que en general se cuenta con la participación de Francia, la Unión Europea, Estados Unidos, pero también con la presencia de Rusia y China, ¿no? en todo este asunto, como es natural. Pero bueno, lo dicho, muchísimas gracias a todos por estar ahí. Vamos a hablar la próxima semana de esta posible guerra, de cómo podría desarrollarse, y lo dicho. Muchas gracias a todos y hasta otra.